Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well on this Thursday afternoon. Thank you for joining us to discuss our shelter diversion pilot, RFP. As you can see from this slide, the release date was July 7th, and the due date is August 4th. Next slide, please. Just some housekeeping for you. Due to the volume of participants, you have been placed on mute. We would like for you to submit any questions via the question box, and we will respond to those questions through the slides. And actually, we're going to wait until the end of the presentation. Also, please use the question box to notify us of any technical issues. We do have staff on here that can assist you with that. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Christine Riley. I'm the Director of Homeless Prevention Policy and Planning with the Department of Family and Support Services, and I have two colleagues that I want to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Carrie Moy with Department of Family and Support. I'm a project coordinator, and I am so excited to see so many people here. Thank you so much for joining.
And I'm Julia Talbot. As many of you probably already know me, I'm the person who manages the RFP process for the department. I'm super excited about this one. It's a really unique opportunity, something with CARES Act funding. We don't, it's kind of new money, even though it doesn't last forever. And I'm excited that we're all going to be able to share this new project and opportunity with you all.
So as you can see from the agenda, we're going to do an overview, as always, of who we are as Dfss, our commitment to outcomes. Carrie's going to provide a shelter diversion overview for this RFP pilot. And then Julia will end it with technical assistance and for applicants and information about the e-procurement process. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to end with questions. Next slide, please. So Dfss, our mission is working with all of you, our community partners, to build stability, support the client's well-being, and empower them to thrive. Our priorities are to deliver, collaborate, and inform and steward our resources so that we can better service those in which the funding is going to and those in which the funding is assisting. Next slide, please. Our commitment to outcomes is in order to help those who are most vulnerable. We've created a strategic framework setting and operationalizing department priorities. We started with strategic contracting, engaging our grantees to integrate outcome goals and metrics. Some of you know, if you're shelter providers, know that we had started a couple years ago, ACM, Active Contract Management. And then we're also looking at performance improvement, implementing a performance improvement system to prioritize and execute efforts and improve results. And then also there's system coordination. And this is actually the RFP, the Shelter Diversion Pilot RFP is actually part of that system coordination. And that's why we're very excited about this opportunity. Next slide, please. So when we talk about what we would like to achieve for those Chicagoans in which we're working for, we look at outcome goals, programmatic information, and a framework for improvement. So of course, there's going to be the target population in which you're serving, that context in which you're coming from. Of course, there's going to be program requirements and then performance measures. Next slide, please. Within the RFPs and all the RFPs that we put out to all of you, there is a selection criteria. So we look at the strength of the proposed program, performance management and outcomes, what you're going to offer, organizational capacity. Do you have the capacity actually to do this work? And then looking at the reasonable cost budget justification and leverage of funds. Are there any funds that you're able to bring to the table? Are you able to bring any additional resources? You'll see later on in Carrie's presentation that with the shelter diversion pilot, we will be looking for those agencies who will be able to think outside of the box and bring additional resources, maybe not financially, but through other partnerships that you may have within the continuum or other community-based organizations. Next slide, please. All right, and I'm going to pass it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Christine. So I think let's start at the beginning and talk about what shelter diversion is, because it is newish to our continuum in our community, as well as to nationally. It's something new that people are trying to work through. So the goal of shelter diversion is to end someone's experience of homelessness as quickly as possible while empowering them to regain control over the situation. I know we all work really hard in all of our aspects to limit the trauma of homelessness, but nothing can do that as much as making it as short as possible. And the idea of diversion is to help people end homelessness as close to when they come in our front doors as possible. That will also help us maintain our limited shelter bed capacity to meet for those who are most in need. And then what is shelter diversion? Shelter diversion is a strategy that helps people experiencing a housing crisis quickly identify and access alternatives to safe alternatives to shelter. It's an intensive but short-term intervention, and it's very narrowly focused on the time when a household first requests or enters shelter. And the work of shelter diversion really focuses on a creative problem solving and conflict resolution, really based around the work of conversation with people, and that helps empower people experiencing a housing crisis. This relies on highly skilled diversion specialists who can facilitate a strength-based conversation. It supports households to identify immediate alternative housing arrangements. And if necessary, if through that conversation, the need for other services comes up, diversion also helps connect people with services and, in this case, financial assistance. And I do want to say those services are community services, other services that exist that can help support people and help stabilize them in their housing situation. And I want to be really clear, and it's really important that we all know this, that shelter diversion doesn't act as a barrier to shelter. And in no way should this limit someone's access to shelter. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I think it's always good for us to look at how we got here. And we'll just run through quickly sort of the history of diversion in Chicago. And really this is a snapshot of the evolution of diversion in Chicago. So in June of 2018, the CUC started a diversion work group to think about and test implementing diversion in Chicago, really starting from small pieces of diversion that were already happening, national best practices, and to put together what we wanted diversion to look like in Chicago. The diversion work group laid out sort of the groundwork for system-wide diversion implementation, identifying responsibilities, creating a screening tool and process, starting trainings to build capacity, identifying resources, and even thinking about a method for tracking performance and outcomes. There was also a lot of work around how do we build buy-in in our system for shelter diversion. And these next three things on this graphic, it looks like they happened in turn, but really, you know how our system works, and these things were starting and moving through all at the same time. So the Cleveland Mediation Center came in January of 2019 and did a train the trainer process, which was an amazing experience to sort of add capacity to our system, not only to do the diversion work, but to train others to do the diversion work. And I will say in that part, in learning about diversion and building the knowledge base for the work group, CSH was there and really pivotal in learning about and doing diversion trainings. We also had the Center for Conflict Resolution and ULabs. I know they've changed their name. I think they've changed their name, but at the time they were called ULabs. And they were also part of that conversation, helping us think about all the tools that are available to implement diversion. Catholic Charities Youth Diversion Specialist, which is a resource that had been going before the diversion work group started, continued, and they were able to share with us the work that they were doing, and that they had a 94% rate in the youth that they were talking through the diversion process with. And they stayed out of shelter for at least 30 days after their diversion intervention, which I think is a really great place to start from, that this is something that can work for our system. We also, within that work group, agencies were able to pilot or test diversion in a small way in their agencies. We had a youth shelter diversion pilot, and one of the biggest learnings from there, it started off as a drop-in center diversion pilot, but it quickly pivoted because what they found is that this intervention works better in shelter. There was also a shelter diversion pilot at the centralized shelter intake location, Garfield. At the time, Catholic Charities was operating that service. And they were incredibly successful at starting to have these conversations with people as they were very first requesting shelter. That's sort of a long story of how we got here and how we are able to use this amazing opportunity with CARES Act funds to sort of do the next step in this process and pilot a system-wide approach to shelter diversion. I did want to share this simplified diversion process map that came out of the work group. We are thinking that this is our first stepping stone in how diversion is going to continue to work or start working, depending on your viewpoint in Chicago. So the first step is identifying the front doors. So this is someone's first touch of shelter, whether it's requesting shelter or coming into shelter. And then identifying people who could benefit from a diversion conversation. And then the next part, that critical diversion conversation that is conducted by a diversion specialist. And this is supposed to be a strengths-based conversation, really focus on letting the client have space and time in a very stressful situation to think through their options and alternatives and what would they need to sort of quickly end this experience of homelessness. And then we have this connecting people to resources. How can the diversion specialist help? Sometimes that's something similar to mediation. Sometimes that is a resource that's more financial, and sometimes it's something else. Every situation is very different, which is sort of why we really rely on that diversion conversation to find out what's wrong in an individual situation or what could be helpful. Okay, and then I do want to say one thing that you don't see on here, which I think is really exciting that we can do with CARES Act money, is to really build out a framework to support these diversion specialists, which includes training and management and research support, and even, if not evaluation, something like an iterative process where a guided looking at how this is going and refining as we go. And I think that's really exciting that we have this opportunity to provide sort of a framework of support as well. Next slide, please. Sorry, if you hear me pause, I'm also looking at your questions just in case we are having technical issues. So what is the purpose of this RFP? Coming from that big idea, what are we rolling out now? And through this RFP, we're seeking one coordinating agency and agencies to provide diversion specialists. So I have a little graphic here of how this could work and sort of how we see DFS's role being as sort of someone who helps guide the coordinating agency, but the coordinating agency would have sort of that more day-to-day work with the diversion specialists. On this graphic, I've only represented 7 diversion specialists, which really represents how big the slide is. We are thinking 10 diversion specialists is the right number for our system for this pilot. And based on our funding. And I'm going to read this last bullet. So by using CARES Act funds to pilot shelter diversion practice, we hope to have a positive impact on how Chicagoans experiencing housing crisis and support shelter decompression efforts. Next slide, please. Oh, could we go back, Thomas? I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that I've covered what these two roles are. And you know what? Never mind. We'll go on to the next one. I'm sorry, Thomas. Well, it's better on the next slide. I wanted to make sure I covered what a coordinating agency is, but I do have it written out here. So this does make more sense. Because this is a big role and kind of the super exciting part to me of what CARES Act can bring to this and how we can have this opportunity. So the coordinating agency would manage system-wide diversion programmatic implementation, including directing and overseeing the day-to-day option of the diversion specialists in coordination with the specialist host agency. And they'll act as a central point for communication and coordination. I want to be clear here because I think it could be a little confusing in how I've written it, that the diversion specialists would be hired and maintained as an employee by their host agency, but they would be part of this system-wide effort that is managed by the coordinating agency. And in that way, they would have to sort of take guidance and work as part of this team to make diversion happen in Chicago in a system-wide way where we're all practicing diversion similarly. The coordinating agency will also support an iterative practice that reflects on outcomes and tests new approaches to constantly improve how diversion is practiced by working with partners to resolve concerns and issues. This is new. It builds on work on tools and skills and capacities we already have, but doing diversion in this way is new. And we just want to make sure that the way we're starting is the way we want to continue, which is to constantly look at how our work impacts people who are experiencing homelessness and how we can always do better. The coordinating agency will also be responsible for providing trainings, and that is both trainings for the diversion specialists as well as other shelters and system members, because part of having a successful diversion practice is having shelters buy into diversion and the value of diversion for their operations. They will also need to facilitate a learning cohort to provide ongoing skills training for diversion specialists, administer financial assistance, which we're calling rapid exit, and I will talk about in the next slide, and follow funder regulations. This is funded by both ESG and mostly CSVG CARES, and there are some specific regulations there that have to be followed. They will also have to report to the COC report to Dfss as well as COC on the pilot project progress, challenges, outcomes, as well as meeting funder and departmental requirements. I think a lot of people in our system are really excited about the potential of diversion and really interested in learning more about this pilot and how it's going, and we want to support that as we go. Could I have the next slide, please? So what is rapid exit? I think to start this conversation, the most similar thing that already exists in our system is rental assistance, but this is slightly different because it is geared towards being attached to diversion. So it's a short-term financial assistance that's associated with shelter diversion and supplies financial support for rent arrears, and security deposits. And I do want to say this is very much a short-term intervention. And it's not like rapid rehousing. It's not like that where it's tied to a continuing support. This is diversion is really focused on that a short but intense intervention that can change someone's experience of homelessness and end it quickly. So this is a short-term financial assistance that hopefully can support that. When financial assistance is necessary to end someone's experience of homelessness, the rapid exit resource needs to be provided as quickly as possible. And I think that's key here for the coordinating agency to be able to really quickly provide this financial assistance, thinking that we want to end someone's experience of homelessness as quickly as possible. And in this situation, a month wait time would not be quickly, right? Like we want to really shorten all time frames as much as possible. And here's a sort of the idea of rapid exit is to target it to people who can effectively resolve their housing crisis independently with limited help. So it is not the appropriate intervention for everyone, but by utilizing this short-term intervention and a strength-based conversation, rapid exit can be successful for households that wouldn't likely be prioritized for other supportive housing interventions, which is sort of something, you know, I think we could really add to our system, and I'm excited about. And I just have this caveat at the bottom, and it's in small type, but I think it's really important. The focus of diversion is always on a facilitated conversation, geared towards conflict resolution and creative problem solving. Diversion funds only exist to support this work, and the dispensing funds should not be the focus of diversion activities. This is not an access to a small resources. This is really empowering people to make a quick change in their situation. Next slide, please. Well, I guess I should add that the funding source for rapid exit is CSBG. I just want to throw that in there. So what is the role of the diversion specialist provider? I want to start by saying diversion specialists are really the foundation of a successful diversion practice. So through this RFP, we're seeking an organization to provide diversion specialists. They're responsible for facilitating that conversation I keep referring to. And that is a unique skill that has to be highly, and how do I say this right? Not everyone can be a diversion specialist. It's really a unique skill to have a conversation with someone who's in a very stressful situation and give them the space to think about their alternatives and have a conversation with them that leads to creative solutions or identifying potential alternatives to shelter. Diversion specialists also connect clients to community resources and financial assistance as needed, and they can provide landlord, family, or roommate mediation, or something similar to mediation, where if that is what is needed to get someone back in their more stable situation. The first specialist will report and follow the directions of the coordinating agency. I think this is key in here. They will definitely still be part of the organization who is hosting the diversion specialists, but we need all the diversion specialists to work as a team to roll out shelter diversion in a coordinated way in Chicago. And that is the responsibility of the coordinating agency. So diversion specialists need to, the programs need to be designed to be part of this larger work. And there are two types of diversion specialists included in this RFP: shelter-based diversion specialists and floating diversion specialists. And we can talk about that more on the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I had another slide. Can you put me back one, Thomas? I'm keeping you on your toes today. Great. So a shelter-based diversion specialist is a person that clients would have access to in shelter, and it would be an employee of the shelter. Most likely, a shelter-based diversion specialist would be stationed at one shelter. And I do think that varies by agency. If agencies have multiple shelters, a shelter-based diversion specialist could float around within an agency. I would leave that up to the agency's discretion on what's best for them. But I would also want to point out that with this RFP, we are thinking that we are only going to allot each shelter program one diversion specialist. So one shelter program couldn't have multiple diversion specialists. There's also floating diversion specialists, and this is an opportunity for an agency to hire multiple diversion specialists and provide that service to many shelters, so that those diversion specialists would go from shelter to shelter to have conversations with people. And I would say even shelter-based diversion specialists, it's probably still going to be a job that needs access to mobility, whether that is helping clients with mediating their relationships or something similar. So those are the two main types. And I would also say there's a third place where we're targeting diversion specialists that's not included in this RFP, and that's at the centralized shelter intake, the work that happens at Garfield and EHARC. And we're doing that as an extension of a CARES Act contract separate from this RFP. So I just wanted to share with you guys that is moving forward at the same time as this. All right, this time I mean it, Thomas, I'm sorry. Next slide, please. Thank you. Like we've mentioned before, this is CARES Act funding. So the pilot is administered by the Department of Family and Support Services through CSBG and ESG CARES Act funding. I think one of the most important things to see here is that you will have to input client data into STARS and follow CSBG and ESG funder requirements for reporting. And that might be a different process for some agencies. And then I think it's worth talking about that this is a short-term contract. We're thinking it is September 1st through September 30th, and that is a year and a month. So with CARES Act funding, that one caveat is that it is time limited, and it ends September 30th, 2022. Next slide, please. So here, just some guidance in thinking about how we set up this RFP. Hopefully this will address some of your questions. Applicants can apply for either the coordinating agency or the diversion specialist, or both. A coordinating agency could also hire mobile diversion specialists. So in your proposal, I think it's important to be clear about what you're proposing, and we have set this up to maintain flexibility. So you can provide either, you can provide coordinating agency, diversion specialist, or diversion specialist, or both. And then I also want to say that someone providing applicants can provide shelter-based or floating diversion specialists or a combined approach. This is new, and we're looking for your insights on how you feel this would be best implemented. And that's why we're keeping this flexibility. So if you feel that it is best to have a shelter-based approach that also has a floating aspect, please share that with us. And we are willing to see, willing for that to be an option of how this rolls out. So you can combine these roles in any way that you think provides opportunities for efficiency. But I do want to say we are all seeking one coordinating agency and up to 10 diversion specialists. And as I said before, DFSS will not award more than one shelter-based diversion specialist position per shelter program, just because we only have 10 and we want to cover the whole city, or provide coverage to the whole city. And we are really looking for partnerships, and we also are comfortable with subcontracting arrangements, knowing that this is a big lift and an exciting way to build partnerships inside the COC or among you. And I will say, when we're reviewing these RFPs, we're going to consider how all the different projects that are proposed fit together, and with the goal of achieving a comprehensive citywide implementation of shelter diversion. And then one thing I would like to add here is there is opportunities in the RFP to talk about specialized populations, and that is also something that we will take into consideration. Next slide, please. So one thing that's really important, there's a space in the application to clearly indicate which role or roles you're proposing to fill, and please take that opportunity to lay it out for us. It doesn't have to be long, but we need to know clearly what your goal is. And then this is new, so I could see why it could be challenging for us to review them and for you to write them. And so please take this opportunity to just sort of lay it out in a very clear way so we know what we're looking at. And then the other thing here, and I think this, I've tried to stress this as we go, but DFSS is interested in understanding your program design, as well as how your agency will team and contribute to the implementation and ongoing practice of shelter diversion. We are currently how we are thinking about diversion is that it will be a team effort, and people, a coordinating agency will have to work with other agencies who are providing diversion specialists all together to make this work. And we really want to see that reflected in your responses, how your agency can contribute to this team implementation. And then I want to remind you for the question on the budget, we're asking you to explain key budgeting decisions you faced and why you consider your program costs to be reasonable. I just threw this on here. I know it's often a question that is skipped in our RFPs, and I'm asking you, please take a moment and share that information with us. And then I wanted to address the last part there relating to the budget. There is a minimum salary for the diversion specialists of $58,000 annually, and this is sort of I don't want to say new, we've done it at DFSS before, but I don't know that the homeless division has done it before, where we put a minimum salary. And that is to give you an idea of what we're thinking about, as well as sort of kind of address some of the feedback we've heard about the challenges with hiring for CARES Act funded projects, since they are time limited. And we really want to think about this pilot in terms of 1 year and being able to staff up quickly, but also retain that staff, because we are putting so much, retain that staff for the full year, because we are putting so much effort into training, that we're thinking that we're asking delegates to start at this higher level to support those goals. We also sort of researched similar pay ranges for positions of similar skill sets, and this did seem to be appropriate. So I wanted to put that out there. And then our next slide. Thank you. As you know, the proposal was released on the 7th. We are currently having the webinar. Applications are due August 4th at noon, and this can't be said enough. Please don't wait till August 4th at noon to put in your application. It is a process that happens on the computer, and anything that can happen will. Please start early in putting your application in. I'm sure Julie will reiterate this, but the deadline is August 4th at noon. We have no flexibility here, so put that in your calendars. The contract start date is September 1st, and we're expecting program to kick off to be October 1st, thinking that we will need time for staffing up and training. So we tried to build that in as much as possible. And then I think we're going to go on to Julia's, and then we'll do your questions. I do see there's a lot coming in.
So this is Julia Talbot. I'm the person who manages the RFP process for the department. I'm going to just take a minute here to look at the attendee list, maybe kind of see where you guys are coming from. When I was looking, I generally go through how to do our, how to accept an amendment and submit. I did, this time I kind of switched it up just to kind of keep it fresh, about like how to actually start an application. But I want to, since I do see there are some questions coming in, I do want to kind of like come through this pretty quickly so that we have time for some questions on this program model, since it's new and it's, you know, complicated, or maybe it's not a straightforward, but nothing in homeless is ever straightforward compared to some of our other models, which are much more like find somebody a job and watch that for 30 days. Not to ever diminish the work of other units in the department. Just some of these, sometimes homeless always strikes me as more complex because the customer or / client tends to present more complexly. Anyway, if you are a new agency, let's just get started. If you're a new agency, I have this slide here just so that you know kind of what you are going to need to be prepared to upload into the new agency, you know, into the iSupplier network. As Carrie indicated, we do all of our applications online via the e-procurement system. You as an agency, access e-procurement via iSupplier. So as a new agency, if you don't have an account, you're going to start an account in iSupplier, and iSupplier is the account that accesses e-procurement, which is where our applications are. And later, if you are awarded a contract, what you're going to use to voucher and receive payment, etc. So just so if anybody's new, you should be prepared to upload your articles of incorporation, your IRS affirmation letters that it's 501c3. You need to, for us to enter into a contract with you, you need to be able to do business, which means that you actually can't, if you have a letter, like you've just submitted for a 501c3, which I don't think is anybody here, to be honest, or that you're looking for a PIN number, those things are pending. You can't enter into a contract with that. You need to actually have those things set up with the others. We also require that you have central contractor or CCR registration, proof of registration, a DUNS number, and then a certificate of good standing letter with the state of Illinois, which you can get off the state of Illinois, I think it's the Secretary of State website. Let's go to the next slide. So, as Carrie indicated, late applications will not be accepted. This particular funding stream has a very tight timeline associated with it. We really, all the time that we spend, if we had to reissue an RFP, cuts into that very short timeline. And so we really don't want to, we don't want to do that. If you have questions about how to manage this, any e-procurement process, you should talk to OBM via customer support at citychicago.org. You can make use of the e-procurement hotline for help at 744-4357 or help. The hotline operates during business hours only, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. There are training materials that you can look at, and then all of the RFPs are found at this website. So we're going to be posting this, we'll be posting this PowerPoint to the DFSS website after this webinar. So you should be able to find these things if you're looking. The bottom thing is where, in fact, you can go to find the application. Additionally, you can always call me or email me, and I will give you as much help and support on navigating e-procurement or answering your basic questions about how to make an application. You don't want to call me for your program questions because I don't know the answers to them, and I'll refer you to the program staff. But you're having a hard time logging in, or you have a question about a form or anything like that, do give me a call or email me. I try to get back to everybody within 24 hours. Let's go to the next slide. So, as I say frequently, my general rule of thumb for e-procurement is to start early and to save often. If I said before, if you've never done business with the City of Chicago, register into iSupplier as quickly as possible. You go through a few screens and then you submit an application. It takes 3 to 5 days for you to get a return email that gives you the link to logging in and such. I also tell people, please, 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 especially because it's a new program, review the narrative and scope documents and the application questions that we have. They're all connected. We go through the scope and we pull out our application questions. We share with you the evaluation and selection criteria, the point spread, the unique evaluation criteria that we're going to be using to review your application. All of this stuff is tied together. The questions are linked to the scope and to the evaluation criteria and selection criteria. So if use the RFP documents that we give you as guidance and formulating your answers. If you have a question about what direction you think you should take, be a critical reader of the scope document. I know sometimes they're dense, they're hard to get through. This is kind of where, Carrie and Christine are in terms of I've read this, I still don't get it, but really, really, really use the documents to help you out in terms of providing you with guidance in crafting a great application. Logistically, there's a 4,000 character limit, which includes punctuation and spaces for each response. So you'll see in the e-procurement environment under the application questions, which are referred to as requirements, the answers are called quote values, and those individual boxes are limited to 4,000 characters. E-procurement works best with Internet Explorer, a browser that no one uses anymore. It also works just fine on Chrome and Firefox rather. And I think there's another one that I tried, but it works fine with those too. If your computer is really having a problem though, I do say go to Internet Explorer and try running the e-procurement application off of Internet Explorer, because that's what it was built on originally. Also, don't use your back button on your browser when you're in the e-procurement environment, because it will go back, but it will stop saving everything you do. And so when you go to save, it will give you an error message and throw you out of the system, and you'll lose all the work that you did from the time that you hit that back button on your browser. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so I'm just going to briefly go through how to start an application. We'll go to the next slide. Basically, this is going to assume that you have an e-procurement, an ISO Flyer account. So you're going to go to that website that I had a few slides ago. I had a link to, and you'll know if you want to look at. I have the screenshot here. If you just wanted to look at stuff, you can click the little eyeglasses on the far right-hand side under details, and that will take you to stuff. But if you want to log in, you click on the login button on the bottom right-hand side, which will take you to the next screen, which is a login screen. So that next screen, your username and password. So you're going to put in your username, you're going to put in your password. If you have forgotten one of those things, you're going to hit Login Assistance, which I think is the next slide. And that will help you reassess. Oh, no, I didn't do that. So anyways, so if you need to reset your password, you don't remember your login information, you just hit that Login Assistance. It will take you to some screens that are very helpful. Once you log in though, you'll get to this online bidding menu screen. And to find the RFP that you're looking for, you're going to go to your main menu. You're going to open the City of Chicago online bidding to sourcing, and then open that to the sourcing homepage and click on homepage, the sourcing homepage, which will bring you to the next slide. And you can search there for your solicitations by number, or by title. If you're looking for the number for this one, it's 8165. So the solicitation number for this program is 8165. So if you get in there, all you have to do is click, make sure you're searching by number, click on 8165, hit go, and that will bring up the RFP document for you. So once you've done that, we're going to go to the next slide. And you would click on this. You open it by clicking on the RFQ number. So that's 60, which is highlighted in blue. It's 8165. This will take you to a screen that looks sort of like this. And then in this actions bar on the right-hand side, you actually don't want to do online discussions. You want to do the create quote. So you'll do the create quote, and that will have you start your the creating of a quote will kind of have you start your application. If you hit the view amendment, the printable view, that will actually print out the entire RFP document for you, which might be kind of helpful if you're more of a paper person. If you hit online discussions, I think that will take you to where you can actually email us if you need questions. So let's go to the next slide. And so this is if you need to actually contact us because you have a question, you'll hit new message, and that will allow you to email me specifically, and I will then get an email saying that you emailed me. Or you can email me at my City of Chicago account, which is, I believe, the information is at the back of this webinar. Let's go to the next slide. So this is also just how to do a question, part of starting an application if you have a question. And the next slide. And okay, so now we're going to go to how to submit. So I've shown you a little bit how to start an application, how to ask a question. Now we're going to talk about how to submit an application. So it's, you have done everything you need to do. You have finished it all. And here you go. The way that you start is by saving your draft one last time, because I believe in saving continuously. And then you're going to click continue. After you click continue, you're going to get that is going to trigger the e-procurement system to do kind of an assessment of your entire application and tell you where it thinks you might have done something wrong or lacking. And so you'll get error messages. In this case, we're going to talk about two really common ones, but then but the error messages, you might get like 4 or 5 or 6 of them depending, and don't freak out about that. It's very common and they're pretty solvable. In this case, it says you must quote on at least one line in the RFQ. We'll go to the next slide. In e-procurement, I find that the keywords are a little bit, they're not particularly logical to my head. But in this case, there's one line in the RFQ, and you'll see right below that error, there's a tab that says lines. And if you click on that, you'll go to a new screen. In this case, we do not look at the lines for making our budget, to evaluate our budgets. We look at the Excel spreadsheets that you upload. But the lines, they do want you to have like placeholder numbers. You can put in the real numbers, you can put in placeholder numbers. It doesn't matter, because we're not going to look at those lines for your evaluation. We're going to evaluate your proposal. We're just going to use those as a placeholder because it comes into play at the time of contracting. So that's that's the most common error that people get. And we're going to go to the next slide to see another one. A quote value. So you see here, the quote value is required for the requirement first name. In this case, requirement means application questions in e-procurement speak. Quote value, the thing that I was talking about having a limit of 4,000 characters, is the answer. In this case, the quote value, the requirement rather, first name. So the name of the requirement is first name, which would be the question. In this case, it's also would be also the question, as in what is your first name, or in sometimes longer, more meaty questions. It's just it's saying you didn't fill in that particular box. So all you have to do is then go in, put in your missing answer and save and continue. So let's go back, let's go to the next slide. Great. So once your application is free from errors and you're ready to proceed and submit, you're going to click, at this point when you click continue, instead of getting error messages, your application is going to go into this review and submit phase, which you can see up here on the left-hand side where it says review and submit. You can save draft. You'll see here on the right-hand side that you can save the draft again. You can also hit printable view if you want to print out a copy or have a PDF copy of the application that you're going to submit. I always recommend that you do this because e-procurement, you can't really access your application after you hit submit. You might be able to get a printable view of it, but you're not going to be able to get it in a manipulatable non-PDF form. So I do recommend you have the printable view, just so I think you can get it added after you submit, but just in case, it's always nice to just have it. So you're going to save your draft one more time. At this point, clicking, you can see the submit button isn't highlighted yet. So you're saved your draft. And let's go to the next slide. It's going to put you into it. So then you're going to, after you do this last save, it's going to put you into a screen where basically you can review all of your data and confirm that it's accurate. You can make sure that everything's the way you want it to be. You can check your attachments and make sure that all the right attachments have been attached. And this is going to be like one long page. So when you scroll, this is the top of the page. This is what it looks like. If you keep scrolling down, you'll see in the next slide what it looks like. At the bottom of that page, you're going to have the ability to do your electronic signature. You're going to put in your name and your title first, and then you're going to check the box. When you check the box before you do the name and the title, you get an error message and you have to do it. At that point, you're going to, let's go to the next slide. You'll be able to submit that I couldn't get in the screenshot. I couldn't get the whole thing in there and still have it be kind of legible. So you can see over here on the left-hand side is the name and title electronic signature box. Over here in the lower right, in a really small box that says submit. So you're going to click submit, and that will you will have submitted your applications. Congratulations. So next slide. You'll know that your submission is accurate because you got this confirmation screen. The e-procurement will also send a confirmation email within 24 hours of your submission. And if you're the kind of person who's just nervous about this stuff, just call or email me. I can see that you've submitted like the second that you submit. I'm more than happy to verify it if you just want the extra peace of mind. So that's kind of like, and that's what I have to say about making applications, asking questions in the e-procurement environment, and submitting an application. Let's just go now. I think we're going to go back to Carrie and Christine, and we're going to talk about do the questions. So I'm sorry, this is an error. They're not, the application is due on the 4th, not on the 14th at all. So don't, don't look at that screen. Go to the next screen, Thomas. Thank you. So now we have questions. I see here there are quite a few questions. So let's just see if I can't I see somebody here had a hard time hearing. It looks like that was.
Okay, Julia, I think Christine could handle the questions if that's helpful for you.
Perfect. It doesn't matter. I was just going to read them. I wasn't good.
Yeah. Can you all read? Because for some reason my box isn't expanding, so I can read them at little bits and pieces.
I am happy to read, but not to answer. You really don't want me answering these because I'll just move something.
Okay. So we had someone who asked who conducted the training, and I sent that response over text, but I don't know if you can all see it. So just so everyone has that, it was the Cleveland Mediation Center did our training that took place in early 2019.
And they're a national, they've done a lot of trainings for different cities nationally. So, and they were referred in regards to our continuum training.
They were fantastic.
So the next question is, what would be the anticipated caseload of a diversion specialist? How many people in the shelter could be handled by one person?
So in regards to what we're looking at, like how many people could be diverted as a whole, the goal is like 5% of the total number of shelter calls that we get in a year. And I'll break that down. In 2020, there were like 34,000 calls to 311 for shelter. And we're looking at, and we don't want to say that because diversion is a short-term engagement, it's not a continuous conversation or effort, like meaning that you have to meet with the client 3 times a week, 4 times a week. It's an initial couple-hour conversation. And then there will be some follow-up, 30-day, 60-day, 90-day, that piece. And as Carrie stated in the beginning, diversion can take up to 14 days. So it may take a little while to provide some conflict resolution, to provide resources. So we don't have a specific number, but the goal as a system is to divert 5% of the total of shelter calls we get. So I don't want to give like a range, like it'll be 2 people, but it's just different conversations.
So then the next question is, why would the diversion specialist be based at shelters instead of at 10 South Kedzie or other DFSS sites where people seeking shelter go first?
As Carrie mentioned earlier, there will be diversion specialists. We're working to expand Salvation Army's contract currently to have them at the centralized location at 10 South Kedzie. But also in regards to having them based at shelters and having floating diversion specialists, it's because you may not be successful in having that conversation right when someone enters shelter. Right when they're seeking shelter. So I just mentioned the 14-day. So someone can enter shelter, and then like the next day, the diversion specialist having a conversation with them, knowing that they're new to shelter, and that diversion process can start. So it doesn't necessarily have to be directly at, the front door, meaning 10 South Kedzie, where shelter, they're asking for shelter, but it may be, after they settle into shelter and then having those conversations, because some people aren't as open with their situation the first time.
Good point.
Could I add there too? I think there might be, I think this is sort of a pilot. So we want to test different options and see what works best for different populations. I think also the way the transportation works at 10 South Kedzie, if not everyone comes into 10 South Kedzie to go back out to shelter, there are people who are taken directly to shelter, and just based on the amount of time that exists in a day, that just might not be possible to have the diversion specialist be through shelter placement. So we want to test different options and see what works best for all the situations that happen. And people are also placed in shelter at 2 a.m. Maybe not a good time to have a conversation. It might vary by person. Right.
So it says now, so all diversion specialists would be working in shelters, just some to 1/1 agency's assigned shelter and the floating to many shelters.
I think here DS is diversion specialists.
Yeah, I'm sorry, diversion specialists.
So some will be attached to a shelter and some will be floating.
Okay. Are there any requirements?
I wonder, I'm trying to think about like why you might be asking this question, and then we are trying to test different options and to see what works best.
And then what are the education requirements? Does DFSS have any requirements for education or experience for the diversion specialist role?
We have not created a job description ourselves, but we have done research. Various communities across the country, our partner agencies here who are currently doing diversion, and it's at least a bachelor's degree. But we have not put out an actual requirement for that, but at least, and as you can see from the salary, that the minimum salary that requested, so we do want someone who has some experience, but we don't have, actually, qualifications in regards to what is needed. But from what we've seen through the research over the past few years, at least a bachelor's degree.
Okay, great. The next question is the $58,000 salary minimum including benefits, or is it salary only?
That's salary only. That's not including fringe.
Okay. And when will agencies be alerted if they are awarded?
The week of August 23rd.
Amazing. Is there any flexibility in the salary range for the diversion specialist so that it can be more in line with an agency's compensation structure?
So the salary range was driven and largely driven by feedback, especially recently where we've heard about the challenges for hiring for CARES Act funding, since it's time limited, as Carrie stated, that it's only for a year. And we know that some of our agencies and other partner agencies are needing to increase salaries or do bonus incentives. So we thought this salary was a way to get a higher level of staffing, and also so that when it's time to staff up for the agencies, that it's a salary that people will actually be looking at, even though it's a year contract. Also, again, during our research over the last year and looking at diversion specialists and those with the skill sets and functions of a diversion specialist, this is the pay range. This is around the pay range.
So then the next question is there a preference that diversion specialists be connected to shelters rather than other types of service providers?
I think if you're a floating diversion specialist, I don't think you have to be connected to a shelter because, of course, you're not a shelter. So if you're a community-based organization that wants to have a diversion specialist. You don't necessarily have to be a shelter, but of course, the diversion specialist will be working with shelters in partnership with the under the direction of the coordinating agency.
Could I add here, Julia? Sorry, thank you. I think it might be important to say that, oh my gosh, I just lost my whole train of thought.
So we were talking about if diversion specialists can be connected to shelters rather than other types of service providers.
Oh, I did want to be clear that this is a shelter diversion RFP. A diversion intervention can happen through outreach and can happen in drop-ins, but this RFP is for shelter diversion that takes place when someone asks for shelter or when someone is placed in shelter. So I want to be clear there that a diversion specialist does not have to be attached to an organization that provides shelter, but the diversion intervention is taking place in shelter.
Mm-hmm. Important distinction. So is there a limit to the amount of funds that can be distributed per diversion specialist?
Could I ask for clarification here? Do we mean the rapid exit funds?
I think there's a floor, but there's no ceiling in terms of how much you pay a diversion specialist.
Right. I don't know. Maybe Louisa could give us an update on if she means the rapid exit funding or like a flexible fund that they give out to clients, or is she talking about a funding for a diversion specialist, like what we would give to an agency?
Yes, that is. I don't know, Louisa. Maybe you can type in some questions.
Because there are regulations from CSBG on what that rapid exit fund.
She's saying yes, the flexible fund to clients seeking shelter.
So there are specific terms with CSBG, how we laid this out. So it would be, I think it's, you know what, let me put it in the FAQ so that I make sure I get it correct from what we had from CSBG. But yes, it is a by funder limitation.
Yeah, and also really quick, I'm sorry, Julie, and also we wanted to emphasize too that the focus of the diversion intervention is not to immediately provide financial assistance, because some people may not need that financial assistance. Some people may just need that mediation or conflict resolution, or just that conversation about, you know, who else can you stay with. So we don't want people to focus on, oh my gosh, I can give them money and solve their problems. No, we really want to see how we can help them and empower them to make decisions that can get them into more stable housing.
Here, will floaters work anywhere except shelters?
Betsy, I love that you're bringing the tough questions. So this is a shelter diversion pilot. So we're really focusing on shelter diversion, but it's also a pilot. So I would say we're starting with shelter with a very strong focus on shelter. If we have a learning that tells us that this is not the way we should be going, we have flexibility here, but if this is shelter diversion, would be my answer. Christine, did I get that right?
Yeah, I don't know if they're asking, like, do they have to work at shelter? Because I think it's the same question we answered before, saying that they don't have to be an employee of a shelter. If a community organization wants to have a diversion specialist that will be a floater within the shelter system, that's fine. Okay. I think that's covering both bases.
So that was kind of that's the last of the questions that I can see here. I don't know if there's other people who have questions about this.
I do see one from Louisa. She clarified, yes, the flexible fund to clients seeking shelter. Okay, so that, just for everyone, that's not rapid exit. That's not the CSBG funding. We have a small pot of DFSS corporate funds. I would say there isn't a limit, but the pot is quite small. So that would be my answer to that question.
Okay, let's see.
It's designed to be flexible.
Other people, if there are any other people who have questions. All right, here we go. Here's some more. Is there a minimum number of diversion specialists that a provider should propose? One?
I would, the minimum would be 1 and the maximum would be 10. I'm sorry, I don't mean to to laugh here. We do want to allow flexibility. So I'm sort of laughing at myself for repeating myself so often. But yeah, minimum would be 1 for a shelter.
And then how do you determine a total budget, and how do we know what is reasonable?
So I think it's hard for me to answer that, not knowing if you're talking about the coordinating agency or diversion specialists. So for the coordinating agency, I would say to look at those responsibilities and think about how many staff members and what percentage of their time would be needed to provide those services in a quick way, to keep that into mind, that we are trying to move this quickly. For diversion specialists, we gave a salary range, so that's a starting point for your personnel costs. And then I think it's worth thinking about what would you need so that one person could do this work. So do they need computers and office space and a phone, transportation, to add those costs in. Christine, is there anything else we should add?
No, I mean, yeah, it's a regular budget in regards to materials and supplies. Yeah.
And then would a diversion specialist be able to work with a CCBYS agency who are working to replace a minor in the home?
Oh, that's complicated.
Wait, what's the question again, Julia, please?
Would a diversion specialist be able to work with a CCBYS agency who are working to replace a minor in the home?
Usually, I mean, we usually it's 18. I mean, I know there's some shelters that, well, a couple youth shelters that work with CCBYS. But doesn't CCBYS agencies already do? I guess I need clarification, because it's my understanding that CCBYS is that intermediator that actually places those who are under a certain age back into the home. I guess I'm just looking for more clarification. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I would think about this. Like, this is a activity for people who have come into shelter. So if a minor has come into your shelter and they have an opportunity for CCBYS, which I would think would be like a community service that already exists, to be part of this work, then I think that could be a role for diversion specialists, is to help make that connection happen and end that person's experience of homelessness.
Yeah, this is Betsy. Maybe
it's complicated.
You could ask. You could provide us with a little bit more direction on what you are looking for here, or what your question is. In the meantime, we have another question. Should our budgets include any funds that go to clients in discussions with the diversion specialist?
So, like client assistance, is that what they're saying?
Yes.
So yes, so client assistance should be included.
Yep.
Thinking about what that may entail.
Okay, great.
But I want to be clear that rapid exit would not be there unless you're the coordinating agency. They would handle that part. So it would just be sort of like that flexible corporate money.
There we go. So now, I mean, what other questions? Are there other questions? This is good. We've kind of come to the end of the questions. Are there more questions? Oh, here, Betsy, here's in connection to the question about the CCBYS agencies who are working to replace a minor in the home. Betsy says, I am wondering if the diversion funds would be able to help with replacing the minors in the home if financial constraints were part of a minor leaving the home. So is that an allowable cost?
So CSVG rapid exit funds, I couldn't see how you could make them work in this situation. The person they go to would have to be the leaseholder, and I just don't think that's possible in this situation. The flexible funds, there is a possibility there, but that's not a large pot of money.
Yeah, and we can do some follow up to Betsy and respond to it in the FAQ.
Okay, great. It says, oh, the lease, okay to the leaseholder. That's helpful to know.
And that really is the rapid exit specifically.
So let's see if there's any other questions. This is like where I start feeling like I'm in like that Ferris Bueller with the guy who's like questions. So if you know, we've gotten a lot of good questions. We're going to be putting that into an FAQ document that will be attached as an amendment and posted on the Dfss website as well, I believe. This webinar will be posted, a link to the webinar itself if you want to relive this glory via YouTube. That's going to be posted to the Dfss website, as will a copy of the PowerPoint presentation you just all looked at. The due date on the application, as I stated, and Carrie's dated also, is August 4th at 12 noon. Save early, submit often. We look forward to seeing your applications. If you have additional questions, programmatic questions, go to Christine and Carrie. Christine's phone number is all over the RFP document. If you have more sort of technical questions about how to operate and get what you need to get done in the e-procurement environment, do give me a call, or the OBM helpline at 312-744-HELP. This looks like we've kind of come to the end of our questions. I thank all of you for taking the time out to attend this webinar. Christine, Carrie, do you have any additional words you'd like to share?
Just thank you, as Julia stated, and we stated earlier, we're very excited about this opportunity. Again, it's a pilot, so we really want to see what works, and you know, how we can partner with the different entities that apply and get the funding. So thank you again for your attendance, and please let us know if you have any additional questions. Carrie?
Same. Thank you very much. Really look forward to seeing what your responses are.
Great. All right. Well, you can all go forward. Have a wonderful rest of your day.